Everyday injustice.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our discussion of economic development in Davis. I am David Greenwald, the editor and director of the Davis Vanguard, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We've been tracking economic development issues here in Davis for the last decade, and now we face some very interesting but also some very challenging times with a triple threat of economic downturn, COVID, and climate change. We've paid a lot of attention to the first two things, but in the last month, we have had a vivid reminder of the grave threat of climate change. So I'm going to introduce our main speaker in a moment, but I want to set the stage here. This program is the latest in a series of discussions we've held on economic development, but I want to let everybody know that this is not intended to be a debate over DISC or even primarily a discussion about it. It's not that the Davis Innovation and Sustainability campus is not going to come up in these discussions, but it's not our primary focus. Our goal here is to focus the discussion on the bigger picture of economic development. So we're going to start out with a talk by Barry Broome, who heads the Greater Sacramento Economic Council. One of his jobs is to help bring economic development to the Sacramento region, and he'll be talking about the promises and challenges of Davis. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Well, first off, it's an exciting time in our community. I actually feel like, obviously, we have a challenge with the pandemic, but I think the shift in the economy is going to favor our community. So from an organizational standpoint, we have over 40 CEOs, 20 public leaders on our board. The mayor of Davis serves on our board, along with the mayor of Sacramento, the mayor of West Sacramento, Roseville, so on and so forth. 40 CEOs, plus Chancellor May of UC Davis, Chancellor King of Los Rios Community College System, and then President Robert Nelson. And our goal is to make the economy grow at a successful rate, create inclusion, meaning jobs for underserved communities and individuals, move the economy towards a more sustainable future, which includes recognizing the challenges of climate change, and then obviously, making our region healthier, better educated, more quality housing, better quality of life for all residents. So that's our mission, and that's what we do. All of our data and evidence is run by analytics, like anyone else now. We use algorithms, and we buy data platforms, and we integrate and interpret that for our strategies. So I want to take you through this brief overview for about 10 or 15 minutes. So why don't we just get rolling through the slides. So City of Davis is the second most educated city in California, produces all of the core talent innovation-wise for our community with UC Davis. And as you can see, going into our region, we've done a poor job at equity. So out of the top 100, we were 84th in inclusion, 100 being the worst, 71st in prosperity, and 67th in growth. So when you look at the social unrest that's been going on across the country, a lot of that is simply put, 50% of the people are living paycheck to paycheck. We've eradicated the middle class. We're not elevating underserved communities. We're not capturing our college kids. And the end result is there are deep gaps in economic sustainability. And when things don't go well and we get a huge disruption like COVID, you're going to see the kind of social unrest. So the mission for us is, how do we iron out this data so that we're a top performer at prosperity, inclusion, and growth, and keeping our community strong from an environmental standpoint? So obviously, the problem is widespread. This isn't the city of Davis, or excuse me, city of Sacramento. This is region-wide. 47% of the people of color, African-American community is struggling, 42% Latino struggling, but 1/3 of all families in our region are struggling financially. And this is sort of the curse of the anti-growth, slow growth, government town mindset that we've suffered under. Sure, it's great if you're got a PhD at UC Davis, or if you're at Sacramento State, or if you're a business person like me, you can succeed in almost any environment, but it's had a real grounding effect on people, and growing a resilient economy is the only thing that's going to change this data. So dependency on government of jobs, if you add the multiplier, that's about 33% of our economy. So as you're looking at this $54 billion structural deficit, according to Stanford, a $1 trillion pension deficit, that is going to be borne out by our local governments in a reduction of headcount and in a reduction of services. If you look at our economy, it's 1/3 tied to government. So that means as we're recovering from COVID, 1/3 of our economy is in its early phases of a negative correction due to financial shortfalls. That's one of the reasons why the greater Sacramento region took so long from 2008 to recover. Our recovery in 2008 actually took 8 years, and 4 years after 2008 in 2012, we had 12% unemployment. That was the government dependency and the housing dependency. So now our economy is more resilient. We actually are looking at about 9% unemployment right now in the region. State of California is at 11.5. So right now we're running at a higher than normal rate economically than we did in 2008. And that inclusion data is getting better. So all of this is tied to strategic planning and intentional behaviors. I think every American, every Californian, I think the new moonshot and the mission is going to be, how do we address climate change? So this is why UC Davis and DISC and these projects that we work on are so important to us, because we think climate change is going to be a technology strategy. And so if you look right now where Governor Newsom signed that we're no longer going to sell combustible engines in 2035 in California, we're all for that. That's needed for climate change, but also creates a new economic opportunity for electric vehicles and mobility. So one of our concepts that we're developing with the university is this notion of Davis 2050, because parallel to the environmental impacts, by 2050, we're going to have to increase food production by 70%. A lot of people know that food and agricultural output is about 25% of climate change. So how do you increase the food and agricultural output to address this growing food shortage while lowering the carbon footprint of food and agricultural products? We know that's a technology solution, and we believe those technologies are sitting in UC Davis and need to be brought out into the partnership. So public-private partnerships are the standard practice in our industry to solve these problems. And when we think of the city of Davis and UC Davis, we think of that on the public side, and then on the private side, how do we build venture capital? How do we support these entrepreneurs? What are major corporations like Salesforce doing to help us with our economy but keep our carbon footprint low? It's the marrying between public leaders and private leaders that are going to lead to the solutions we've just briefly talked about. So when we look at Davis and when we look at sustainability, we look at it as a seamless model. So when you think of regionalism for us, everybody's heard of Aggie Square. It's a cell therapeutic platform next to the medical school in Oak Park in Sacramento. That's going to create direct jobs and investment in one of the neighborhoods that has serious inclusion issues. You look at Woodland, which is a fast-growing community, becoming very dynamic. They're developing a food and ag research park. Well, that's going to help us solve these food problems. And then you look at DISC as a possible provider of solutions for climate change. You can see that Aggie Square, DISC, and the Woodland Food and Ag Research Park, they're actually going to have a related relationship. Those three sites will share technology, share companies, share talent, grow jobs, address inclusion issues from an equity standpoint, but they'll also be working with a lower carbon footprint than real estate in the past. And many of the technologies that will be developed there will actually help us with clean water, clean air, greater mobility, EVs, and so on and so forth. If you look at the great economies and the second-tiered economies, if you hear of Research Triangle Park or University Research Park and University of Madison, Wisconsin, if you look at our region, we have better assets than Research Triangle Park. We have better assets in Madison, Wisconsin, but we have a fraction of the jobs that those communities have produced. That's because those universities in Wisconsin and Research Triangle Park, for 30, 40 years, those universities have been intimately engaged in the economy. They've been catalysts for economic exchange. They act in a very applied way. The industries in Madison, Wisconsin has 150,000 technology jobs. They're half the size of the greater Sacramento region. We have 58,000 technology jobs. And Wisconsin's been a high tax and highly regulated state and a flyover state when it built those 150,000 jobs. The difference is the real estate developments have research platforms, and the real estate developments connect back to the University of Wisconsin. So a town like Madison and a state like Wisconsin has 3 times as many knowledge jobs as the greater Sacramento region does. Therefore, their economy is more inclusive, and they're producing products, technologies, and services that address climate change issues. Research Triangle Park is developing food and ag solutions, yet from a food and ag standpoint, NC State's nowhere near UC Davis, but the missing ingredients between our region and these 2 regions that are creating high wage jobs for their young people, creating sustainable economies economically and environmentally, is that their universities are pushing the envelope. That's why Aggie Square at UC Davis is so important to us. DISC and the Food and Ag Park in Woodland, it allows us to take our university, deploy that into a private relationship, deploy that into a real estate strategy, and now there's a place for technology to go. So you've probably heard about Aggie Square in Oak Park in downtown Sacramento. We anticipate still that will break ground. That's a $1.1 billion project. But what they're really doing is cell therapies. So now when you look at the old way of treating a patient, you'd give them a chemistry, a drug candidate, hope it works. We know all the concerns about the vaccine for COVID. Maybe it doesn't work. If it does work, only 70% of the people will receive a benefit. It's going to have side effects. You know, what's going on in Aggie Square is to eliminate that kind of medical application so that the therapies that are given to people are more in line with their immunization systems and their own personal health, and it cures them. It isn't a disease management play. So when people look at Aggie Square, you know, they don't really know what it is. They're not sure what it is. People in Sacramento think it's a university campus. People often in Davis and Woodland think it's a food and ag play because the Alice Waters Institute's there, but it's really a life science healthcare play around modernizing medicine, and it's going to change the entire reputation of the region. Aggie Square is going to be like the Golden Gate Bridge to San Francisco. It's going to be like the Needle to Seattle. This region is going to be known, world renowned within 5 to 10 years for Aggie Square and all the great achievements of UC Davis. So now we look at Davis right now, and we're constantly shortlisted by technology companies, food and ag companies, innovative companies, renewable energy companies that want to be in Davis, want to be near the university, and we just don't have a real estate option for them. And so one of the things that we've been working with the broader community about is, you know, the main economic power of UC Davis isn't the medical school, it's the campus in Davis. But the university has struggled with tech transfer. We haven't had seed funds. We haven't had an active angel investor. We haven't had soft landings for our companies. And so what's happened is, you know, some of our greatest technologies coming out of UC Davis, they go to St. Louis, they go to Research Triangle Park, they go to San Diego, they go to Seattle in order to be commercially successful. But mostly what happens is a lot of these commercial applications that can solve climate change issues, food and ag issues, they die inside the institution because there isn't an efficient way to take the technology out, partner with an enterprise, and build a physical environment for that enterprise so that it's close enough to the university to continue to take a novel discovery forward. These are one of the things we want to successfully accomplish in Davis. Next slide. So one of the commitments we got from the development leadership of DISC, which is the Davis Innovation Sustainability Campus, was they will build a 50,000 square foot lab in Davis in their current real estate offerings so that these really important technologies, when they're nascent and an early stage, can spin out, stay near the faculty, stay near the students, develop, elevate, and do so near the campus in the city in a 50,000 square foot lab. We all know, we've been hearing over and over again how hard it is to get lab space off the ground in our community. It's very expensive. It can be $2,000 a square foot. So it's an expensive proposition to build these labs. We do have a commitment from the developer to do that in Davis. So while DISC is being developed, this 50,000 square foot lab will be building and developing these technologies to address climate change, solar energy, electric vehicles, food and ag, and will be maturing while that product's developing. So when these startups come out of this 50,000 square foot lab, maybe they go to Woodland, maybe they go to DISC, if they're science and life science related, animal health around the veterinarian school, maybe they go to Aggie Square. So this 50,000 square foot space will act as an accelerator for innovators at the university and in the Davis community. And then as they mature and scale, they'll be able to choose real estate options from Davis, Woodland to the city of Sacramento. Obviously, one of the things we asked the developers to make sure it's environmentally sound. So the most exciting thing is a net zero carbon footprint, 100% clean energy. That's going to make the real estate expensive, but that's going to keep it from being a real estate development. It's going to remain a really high-end innovative product because the only people that are going to pay for this are going to be the novel companies that are in this industry. So it won't be a great location for just any company, but that's not what we want for Davis. It'll be a great location for the best companies doing the right things, empowering our universities, hiring our students, and addressing climate change. So obviously, if you live in Davis, you go everywhere for a job. That's one of the reasons, people don't like traffic, but the traffic problem in our region is about 30% of all the jobs are in a handful of communities. And so in order to get to your job, you got to come over the causeway, or you got to go down to Berkeley, or you got to get to San Francisco. And this has created the traffic impacts. So the ironic data on this is if we build more real estate inside our communities, you're going to have less people in their cars and more people being able to walk to work. That's going to create better jobs for the people in the city, better tax income for the city, but it's going to dramatically address traffic issues. And now it looks like the going rate, which is very exciting for us, is about a third of all workers are going to telework going into the future. So we predict going forward, 50% of workers are going to be staying home, a third permanently. The remaining amount will be rotating in the office. So it's really like a third, a third, a third. A third's going to be home permanently. A third's going to rotate in the office. A third's going to be permanently in the office. And this is kind of the statistical data currently we're getting out of the top companies. So this is good news for us that have been fighting traffic and worrying about congestion. The telework's going to address that. And then if we build job capacity in our communities, then people can walk to work and our cities can collect that income. So obviously the name of the game is who keeps their college kids win. As of 2015, we were keeping about 10% of UC Davis graduates. That's now increased to 31%. And that's really important because now if UC Davis graduates leave the area, they don't stay in the Bay Area anymore because of the housing, the congestion, the impact. They go down there for a little bit, but we're now tracking that our kids are now starting to move out to Austin and Denver, and we're losing our graduates from the California economy and from Northern California. So now the shift towards things like DISC, the Food and Ag Park in Woodland, and at Aggie Squares, we'll be able to utilize our young people in these technologies, keep them in our community, and then of course that's important to our families as well because everybody wants their kids staying home. So that's just kind of a quick overview on how we're working, what we're working on. And you have my email is bbroome@greatersacramento.com. So if you have any questions, feel free to either send it to me on the chat, of which I can directly address, or I would be happy to respond in an email. So thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to give this overview of our current economic strategy.
Barry, I have a question here from the Davis city manager. And he was asking for you to address the role of incubators in the economic development ecosystem.
They're critical. That's why, everybody knows Davis is a tough crowd to convince to do a development with. That's sort of known. And one of the things that we had said to the developers, if you build this accelerator space for us, we're going to empower companies to get out the door better. We're going to be able to address these climate change issues. I mean, UC Davis could be the leading technology player in the world at producing the technologies to solve climate change. You know, we didn't even get into, you know, the energy expertise. So without these accelerators, the technology either doesn't get out of the door or they move to Research Triangle Park to start up. So we've got to have that accelerator off the ground. And as I said, 50,000 square feet, you know, even if you did it really inexpensive, you're talking about $25 to $50 million. So that's pretty tough for me and the city manager to come up with. So better to do it on the private side. And the developer has committed to that to us and the city manager. If this passes in November, I'll put this space in. And that's going to be a big advantage for our efforts to address climate change. And it's going to help the residents of Davis. And it's going to help our kids keep jobs. It's going to make our faculty more successful too, which is really what makes UC Davis exceptional is the faculty.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today, Barry. So I'm now going to introduce our panel, and I have two questions for each panelist, which I hope we can keep to less than 5 minutes each, and then we will take questions in the chat, and my assistant Michelle will read those out after the panel discussion here. So let me introduce the panel. So first we have Joe DiNunzio, who probably wears more hats than anyone else. He is the executive director of the Child Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. He's an adjunct professor at UC Davis, the president of Phyto Management. He's a school board member, and because he doesn't do enough, he's also the president of the Davis Chamber. So thanks for joining us today. We also have Jim Gray, and this description is not going to do him justice, but he's been working in commercial real estate for the past 3 decades in Davis. And finally, we have Michael McCormick, who also wears a bunch of hats. He is the founder and president of Farallon Strategies, a consultancy focused on transformative climate action. He is the Cool Davis Foundation board president and senior fellow of American Leadership Forum, having previously worked as the senior planning advisor under Governor Brown for 8 years, where he was one of the lead authors of the state's authoritative guidance on climate action planning and general plans. So thank you all for taking time out from your very busy schedules to join this discussion. My first question is for Joe. Joe, I was wondering if you could kind of describe what the current business environment looks like in Davis.
Sure. Thanks for the question, David. I think that it's obviously been challenging for all of our businesses, particularly for small businesses. The plus has been, in general, the community has really come together to shop local, to participate in local businesses. But a huge driver of our economic engine is the university, and there have been fewer staff on campus and virtually no students on campus. And so that has impacted our businesses significantly. Couple examples, some data, about 70% of our businesses that we survey on a regular basis have noted reduced income, about 2/3 of those significant. More than 1/3 have had to either permanently or temporarily lay off staff. I suppose the good news is 3/4 of them have applied for some sort of federal or national or state or local aid. But that aid has, for the most part, for most of them, started to peter out. And there is a nice program that was started by the county for small business grants that applications are being taken this week. It's $236,000, which is not nothing, but in an economy as big as Davis's, that's a small amount. And I think one other thing I want to point out is that, while I think the city has done a great job of doing things like outdoor dining and modifying rules and regulations to try to support businesses adapting to this environment. Some of them have more difficulty adapting because of the nature of their business. So there have been, clearly been some winners and losers. And I think one thing that I really want to point out is one of the biggest groups that we're seeing struggling right now are small nonprofits, who are maybe struggling to be able to generate the kind of revenue they might typically do, and the kind of attention that they do. And so that's been it's been a huge issue. Last thing I'll say is, in general, our community has reacted super well. We have come together to support our local business environment, but these are, in general, super difficult times for our local businesses.
Thanks, Joe. Jim, so what are you seeing right now in terms of commercial space and the availability?
Well, David, I want to thank you for the opportunity, and boy, is it hard to follow Barry Broome and Joe DiNunzio, but I'd like to point out that I think commercial real estate needs to be put in the perspective of its function is to serve the business environment. Its function is to serve government institutions and nonprofits by creating plants and facilities and offices and places to do business. And I like to counsel clients right now to look at the world BC before COVID. Before COVID, Davis had a commercial vacancy rate of less than 5%. We had rapidly growing rents. We had no spaces larger than 10,000 square feet on the marketplace. Then during COVID is the period that we're in right now, and every business that I know, with few exceptions in Davis, is suffering. There are many companies that you can see that are retail that are suffering. You can't imagine how many engineering firms, how many solar firms, how many science firms are also having problems in this environment. They're struggling, they're trying to be optimistic, they're trying to look forward, but these are very tough times, and until we beat this virus, the economy is going to suffer, and we're going to have the during COVID. And then AC is after COVID. What's the next part of the economy going to be? And I think we have to be very realistic about Davis right now. We don't have enough infrastructure. We don't have enough plans. We don't have enough buildings in place to take advantage of the next wave of the economy that's going to be sustainability, climate change, continuing investment in the life sciences, continuing investment in, we don't even have a data center in Davis, one of the hottest real estate sectors. Then think about the logistics of delivery and reducing the amount of travel and road trips by having better distribution of goods and services. The economy's tough, and to me, you got to look at it on this continuum, and I hope that we can take a pretty long-term view. And then lastly, Dave, if you don't mind, I'd just like to share with the audience and with Barry. As you know, we have University Research Park in Davis. My partner Naz and I do the leasing with Mark Friedman, who owns that. It's the former Interland site. We have 310,000 feet. We have 25 different companies. We have the who's who in life science and engineering as tenants there. The Buzz Oates organization on the north side of the freeway has a couple of 100,000 feet. They've just built 55,000 feet of new at the corner of Mace and Alhambra. Attracted Nugget is a headquarters. There's going to be a major announcement probably October 1st about one of those whole buildings becoming an ag biotech center. They're getting ready to move in there. There's a lot of good activity where we have new product. And lastly, Davis has some of the oldest antiquated product in the regional marketplace. And we love the town, love to serve it, but it's a tough place for businesses to do well these days.
Thanks, Jim. So Michael, can you speak to the challenges we currently face regarding climate change, the need for decarbonization, and climate resilience?
Sure, thank you. And just to echo the other speakers' comments, Dave, thank you for inviting me to participate today. So my background has, I'm a planner by training. So my grounding in economic development is through the eyes of land use and then through the climate work I've been doing for the past couple of decades. And you know, we've seen climate change is at the front of everybody's minds right now because of what's impacting our community: air quality, the wildfires, migrants as a result of the disasters and repetitive loss of homes and infrastructure. And the reality is that there is not a foreseeable time in the near future when the number and scope of the wildfires are going to decrease significantly. We have a decade, 2 decades worth of remediation and of mitigation to help address, for example, our wildfire risks. So one of the things that land use planners and air quality and climate folks are looking at is, you know, from an air quality and health connection, you know, people choose to live in places that allow them to be healthy. So Davis has an important role to play as a voice in this discussion about how to support statewide work on managing our forests more effectively and working with other partners across the region to make sure that we're managing our air quality effectively. We are seeing effects of decreased snowpack and increased rates of melt at specific times of the year. So we may see additional flood risk. All the forecasts and projections are showing that additional flood risk is a very real thing, particularly when you add sea level rise to it. And so we need to think about those things for decades in the future in how we develop, where we develop, and why we're developing. On the decarbonization side, Governor Newsom just signed an executive order last week around having zero emissions vehicles, only zero emissions vehicles being sold in the state of California starting in 2035. Commercial vehicles will take a little bit longer, but that's lighter duty vehicles. And that's a significant benefit. As long as our grid is also 100% renewable, we're looking at decarbonization from that side of things. But we also have challenges with vehicle miles traveled and our energy efficiency of our homes and buildings too. Is when we talk about emissions from travel, we're also looking at where we go, not just how we get there and how far we go. So in those vehicle miles that we travel, there's impacts, there's congestions, those types of issues. So from a land use planning standpoint, having a jobs housing balance is really important. So making sure that, as Barry talked about a little bit earlier, that as we're building out the economic engine for not just our city, but the region, that we're considering where people are coming from and where they're going to. Because folks now that are working remotely, like myself, I was traveling the state pretty much weekly. Now I'm 100% remote out of my home office. Well, that's a great benefit from a resilience standpoint because I get to be here with my family, capacity, resources, my network, my neighborhood, and my community. And I think, Jim, you were talking a little bit about how we carry forward post-COVID, and there's definitely a dynamic here around community resilience where we need to connect better to our communities. And the last thing I would say is one of the things that's facing communities quite a bit in trying to grapple with climate change. Today, we have the Board of Supervisors agenda in about an hour that's going to be considering a climate emergency declaration and the development of an advisory committee to address that climate emergency. We have the Mayor's Climate Commission from Sacramento, West Sacramento, and participating organizations putting a robust plan on the table to develop economically through mitigating climate risk and emissions reductions. And we have the City of Davis with a carbon neutrality goal that is now in the middle of developing a new climate action and adaptation plan. We have dozens of initiatives that overlap with Davis and Yolo County, dozens more across the Sacramento region. And one of the most powerful things from a planning and public policy standpoint is alignment. And if we can start working together more effectively to create developer expectations across the region about what they should be doing to reduce emissions and decarbonize. Carbon neutrality is the region-wide goal. That's the standard now for the most part. And then also the expectations around resilience. What do we need to do to build into our infrastructure and to our homes and businesses to make sure that we're resilient to the changes we know are coming, including the air quality impacts, extreme heat, and changes in how people get around and where they live as a result of those impacts. So I think my parting word on this last one is creating developer expectations and staff clarity around what's required in new development, streamlines good development, makes it happen quickly, makes it happen clearly, and then it also disincentivizes those developments that do not have that carbon neutrality goal, that do not have the resilience built into it from the start. So planning through CEQA is a very inefficient way to plan. So we want to create those expectations upfront and clearly in advance.
Thanks, Michael. I have one more question for the panelists, but I want to encourage those in the audience to submit questions into the chat because that'll be the third part of this webinar. So I'll start with Jim here, and you already alluded to some of it anyway, but what does a post-COVID world look like for Davis in terms of commercial space and economic development? Are we going to have the need for some of these things that now that, as Barry mentioned, we may have as many as a third of our workforce working from home and another third kind of swapping in and out? So what is that picture going to look like now?
Well, so David, I think you just have to have a long-term view of the future, that you don't try to select which innovations and which technologies are necessarily going to succeed. You want to be able to prepare yourself to enable and encourage future businesses, future nonprofits, future educational institutions. I liked very much what Michael had to say about planning, but I've been in the planning process in the city of Davis for more than 40 years now. And what's missing in much of our planning is any focus on implementation and measurements of success related to our planning. So I want to encourage us, if we take climate change as very serious, which it should be, are we going to put out not just a plan, but something to help us get there and implement it? And it's not just about developers, it's about homeowners, existing businesses, existing government institutions, existing users. Now, there are some real winners in today's economy as it relates to real estate demand. Think for a second, there's really growing demand all over the country in life sciences. They're very expensive buildings to build. It's right in the sweet spot of Davis. We need to create lots more infrastructure if we want to take advantage. And they're long-term to get done, but we can get that done. Another area, data centers. As we've started working from home, the amount of computer data, digital storage, transmission is growing multifold. We don't have dedicated data centers in Davis, California, very few within the region, and we ought to be focused as well on that. And then the whole issues about e-commerce, distribution, facilitation of both food to the consumer and goods to the consumer with less carbon impact are the areas that I think we need to be focusing on in the real estate world. And then engineering and computer sciences are really strong suits in Davis, And they don't get encouraged as often as they should, in my opinion.
Thanks, Jim. Joe, similar question. What do you see as our economic development needs in a post-COVID world?
Well, it's a tough question, right, David? And echoing some of what Jim said, some of it is blocking and tackling, in my view. And I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but couple-minute answer to the question. It's a much longer conversation. Housing and affordable housing. The ability for us to have a place for people that want to live here, not just of one income type, or in many cases, have both members in the family working in jobs. But affordable housing is a huge challenge for us here in terms of economic development. The second, obvious one is jobs, good paying jobs that can be here local. And, many of us that are blessed to be able to work at the university kind of live a pretty amazing life, not just from carbon footprint, but quality of life. I lived in LA for many years and spent a lot of time commuting. And now I walk to work or bike to work and get in a car hardly ever. It isn't just a good carbon footprint thing. It's also a better quality of life. And so having housing and jobs. Third is, Barry was really more eloquent about this than I can be, but an innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem here. And it isn't, we've got the technology, we've got the talent in our university. We have some of the most amazing faculty and students in the world, but we don't have the infrastructure to support them. And part of it is labs and real estate. Part of it is funding and access to venture capital. Part of it is just a committed group of companies that lift themselves together. I noticed Tim Keller's on this call, with many of you know Eventopia as a prototyping lab. Tim's been doing an amazing job, but he's had a tiny little space and can only serve so many people. We need more resources like that. And then I think, in my role at the university and as running the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, we see thousands of innovators and entrepreneurs a year. And, we go through the Big Bang Business Plan competition, our innovation and entrepreneurship academies. We help teach faculty, grad students, all these people that are highly motivated to take the $941 million of research money that's coming into the university. Let me say that again, $941 million. It's like, I think sometimes we undersell ourselves. UC Davis is one of the most powerful land grant institutions in the world. This money needs to go out into the marketplace to have social impact, to make our world a better place, to address food shortages and climate change and so many other huge problems we have, and create economic benefit. And a huge portion of that should accrue to our region. We should be developing these companies and these technologies to make the world a better place and create economic value here in Davis. And one simple example of this, Evolve Biosystems, a company that started on the university, 3 professors, many years of research, ultimately got to a place where they could create a commercial product to help babies be more healthy. And they made the decision to locate here. And now they've grown that company, have raised a ton of venture capital. It's a sustainable company that has good paying jobs here, but also making the world a fundamentally better place by having healthier babies. So I know it's sort of a bit of a pat answer to a very complicated question, but there you go.
Well, it's kind of an unfair question, right? It asks you to look into your crystal ball, but nevertheless, that's what we have
David,
to do.
let me stop you for a minute. Just one other thing that, that speaking of crystal balls, right? So all this comes back to something you've said many times, which is we're in an environment where our tax base is growing slower than inflation in general. We just not have added to it. And I don't want this to, be a conversation about tax base, but here we go, right? The tax base is what enables us to have city services, right? To address a lot of the things that we want to make this a great place to live. Tax base helps with our schools, right? To provide the kinds of things we want, right? If economic development, sometimes we forget that drops to the quality of life for everybody in our community. So sorry to interrupt.
No, that's good. Michael, and this is kind of the other piece of this puzzle, right? Because I keep hearing, hey, we got climate change, we can't do economic development, but I see economic development as an answer to climate change. I'm curious as to how you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would agree with you. The question isn't if the economy should grow, it should be how the economy grows. You know, our current capitalistic structure requires exponential growth for success. You know, unless we were to shift our capitalistic structure, which some people have proposed, that's a longer webinar. But, you know, we really do need to continue to grow our economy. And here in Davis, from my time, you know, working all across the state, I think some of the most sustainable communities are those that have strong economic growth engines, strong housing growth to support that economic growth. And together, working together, they create a balance in the community so that we're not facing the commute patterns that Barry talked about a little bit earlier in his initial remarks. You know, Davis is unique. We've got some wonderful conservation space that surrounds the city, which restricts the greenfield development that's possible. And I think that's very healthy. We've got very successful models across the United States that show that creates more compact, dense, efficient development because people don't have to get in their cars. And at the same time, those communities that are most successful in that also grow from the core. And the efficiency and resilience of a community is also connected to how close that community is, how they work together to solve problems. And we've recently spent a fair amount of time going through a revisioning of the downtown area of the city of Davis with some understanding that we do need to densify a bit. We do need to go mixed use, bring people in, bring new businesses in, new facilities in. So yeah, I think that in order to continue to grow or to continue to thrive, we do need to continue to grow our economy and our housing stock to make sure that we can serve that economy.
Great.
Hey, Michael,
Go
David,
ahead.
it's Jim Gray. Can I ask Michael a follow-up?
Yeah.
So, Michael, I'm been around a long time, and the only thing that Davis likes less than sprawl is densification. And as kind of my offhand joke about trying to get things done in Davis, I believe we've been working on the downtown specific plan for 3 or 4 years. It's not been adopted. It doesn't have mechanics to measure its success. How do we take and get important decisions about our future over the finish line so that they are implementable, they create incentives, they give clear guidance? How do we do a restart so that we can plan for our future that's an environmentally appropriate, sustainable way?
Jim, you couldn't have asked me a better guiding question because my whole intent on participating on this panel, it has nothing to do with any development proposals that are pending right now or any ballot initiatives. It is about framing the opportunity we have right now, this alignment of county, city, and regional initiatives around climate that allow us to create clarity and incentives and drivers for the change we really want to see on the sustainability side, on the emission side, on the resilience side, and collectively working across jurisdictions in the region, we have this potential that instead of competing with each other for economic development, that we have similar standards across the entire region, and therefore working together to bring people into the region to serve the entire region. Obviously, Davis, we have some unique selling qualities that other jurisdictions don't have in the region. So that should be a very beneficial strategy for us. But to your point, the only way to really incentivize that good development, that carbon neutral, resilient development that we want to see, is to have strong implementation requirements, strong checklist for development opportunities, strong engagement with households to make sure they understand the opportunities, not just around new development, but their existing development, and to bring those efficiencies up in our infrastructure. The city of Davis has a lot of ambition. City staff are doing great work, but we also need to bring together the community in a different way to help drive that efficiency across the community. And right now, we do have this great opportunity with the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan at the end of that process to take goals, policies, and actions and turn them into very specific development standards and codes that are very clear, that are focused, and reduce the level of ambiguity around the application process, the amount of time it takes to process good projects. So hopefully that gets good projects in the door faster. We get them built on the ground faster. We get businesses into them faster, and we continue to grow our economy here as well.
Can I offer one little addition to that? Can we make sure that we don't develop silos, that we're not just interested in trees, we're not just interested in lead, we're not just interested in solar, but we're interested in equity, economic development, sustainability, a better environment, social responsibility. And unfortunately, we take all these silos and fight to just protect the silo instead of the overall health of the community. That's where we're stuck right now.
All right, so we have about 30 minutes. We're going to take some questions from the chat. Michelle has been going through, there's a lively discussion in the chat. So Michelle's going to read out some of the questions, and the various folks on the panel, and also Barry can weigh in on them. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, this is a two-parter question. So what is going to happen to office spaces in downtown Davis? And will that open up substantial space for other new innovative spaces to come downtown? The second part is it appropriate for Davis to commit to a new business park in an environment where commercial space is now opening up due to the pandemic?
So whoever wants to jump in on that is welcome to do so.
David, I'd just bring a moment's worth of reality to the myth of we're going to have lots of new opportunities in downtown. Downtown Davis serves a portion of the office market. We tend to do it in small bungalow facilities. Many of the buildings don't comply with the American for Disabilities Act. Many of the buildings don't comply with Title 24 to reduce our carbon footprint. Many of the buildings are too small. In this COVID era, we need greater space, more social distancing. We need to think about our core area, but we need to also think about modern office facilities to serve the workforce that can be dynamic and built within our community. We're going to have lots of demand.
Yeah, if I could just build on Jim's comment, having spent the better part of 15 years working with local regional startups, Davis Roots for 10 years, trying to find space for them, even when they're small, 5 or 10 people, particularly then when you add in the need for any kind of lab space or any kind of mechanical space. It just doesn't exist downtown. Our downtown wasn't built for that. And if you look at the companies coming out of the research in food and ag and biotech, there's no space downtown that would serve them even remotely well. The other thing we also need to remember is that as a community, our infrastructure is not great. It just isn't. Barry mentioned Madison. If you go to Madison or the Research Triangle and you look at the infrastructure, and I'm talking about roads and electrical and internet, right?
Sewer, water.
Yeah, thank you. and you look at it, we got a lot of work to do, right? And we can get there. I'm not trying to be a negative Nelly. We can absolutely get there, but we should have, for us to be a supportive environment, we need all these things. And if you're an early stage company, Jim talked about, data companies. So many companies come out of university, focused on data analytics, need high amount of bandwidth for the internet. No picking on our current providers, in town, but if your business was reliable, was relying on, that kind of right on the backbone kind of service right now, it wouldn't work, right? And so we need, infrastructure improvements. And if you're a startup, someplace like DISC is going to be much, much more attractive to you. There's some nice things about downtown, being able to go and walk for lunch and all that, don't get me wrong, but it's just not realistic to think that that's going to become a hotbed for, early stage or certainly growth companies. And if you look at the analogs, the two that Barry picked are good ones in Madison and the Research Triangle. That's not how they grew up either.
Let me ask a follow-up, because part of what the city is doing is updating their downtown specific plan. And, your point is well taken that buildings are old. I'm sitting in an old building myself that's not ADA compliant. It's small, it's antiquated, but we can redevelop the downtown. Is that an answer? Not necessarily the answer, but an answer?
So, since I shot my mouth off a minute ago, I thought for a second about Fifth and G. Vic Fazio, when he was congressman, helped us build the USDA Center, create a stimulus with the city of Davis for the mixed-use project at the corner of Fifth and G. 20 years later, the federal government shrinks and they make about 12,000 feet of vacancy available. My partner and I worked with the Yaxon Unger family who owns the building, and we were successful in attracting Mars Candy to reconvert former government office space, but it involved hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars in new investment. It was only a 25-year-old building. There's not an announcement yet, but there will be an announcement soon that the remainder of the space has gone into life science and will be available and leased by a life science company. We can do this if we are realistic about making projects implementable, achievable. It's good to have guiding paths. It's terrible to micromanage and not believe that world-class companies don't want great architecture, don't want to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. They measure their carbon footprint more than most of us as consumers and homeowners. They're really quality committed. We ought to get out of the way of many of these companies who are interested in investing in our downtown.
Michael?
Just to echo that, downtown redevelopment is oftentimes a heck of a lot more complicated and more contentious than developing in a greenfield. There's more neighbors, there's more interest, there's more not in my backyard because people have lived there for a long time, businesses have been there for a long time. But that being said, it is, if done right, the most efficient form of development. So prioritizing downtown development as the primary way of driving the financial progress of our city, I do think that's really important. And then also acknowledging that in some cases, development that we would like to see within the city may not fit within that downtown construct. So the question is there anywhere inside the city limits that we could do that? Because that's going to be a lot easier to connect to existing infrastructure. That's going to be a lot easier to help connect to transportation, water, sewer, electric. But again, you get more neighbors when you do that. So part of our development construct in California is that we give surrounding property owners a lot of opportunities to engage on a project. And in most of the state, that means most development occurs in the greenfield, which is exactly why the city of Davis adopted our conservation easements around the city to help protect our city, to make sure that it doesn't sprawl out really quickly, but also acknowledging that in some cases, the city will need to expand to accommodate the needs that are in front of us. So the longer term perspective is, most jurisdictions aren't going to stay to an urban growth boundary forever. There's going to be growth in that boundary at some point. The question is the best possible way to grow, and is the best possible use of that space that we're bringing into the city.
And David, if I could jump in for just a moment, Michael, that was really well said. I just want to add two things to what Michael and Jim said. The first is, I don't think, I'll speak for myself. I think the redevelopment of downtown is fantastic, and we should absolutely do it. And I'm not sure, and I know there's a bit of a kerfuffle in the chat, why it's an either or. It's not. And if you look at the businesses that are likely to most thrive in the downtown environment, they're not the kinds of businesses we're talking about for DISC or the kinds of businesses that I work with. I'll give you one example I've just been working with right before this call. It's not here in Davis, it's up out of UW in the Seattle area. A company that started with a few, 3, 4, 5 people in augmented reality. They've now got funding and they're ready to expand, and they wanted to, stay there and expand there. And they need 15, 16, 18,000 square feet. They need tech space to prototype their technology. They need it to be open, and then they're sensitive of COVID-19 and trying to think about how they keep their employees safe. That's you're talking about apples and avocados. I mean, it's not even close to the same kind of needs. So I think downtown absolutely. If you look at efficiency and density and all the things we know about urban development, makes perfect sense. But it's not an either or.
All right, Michelle, you want to read another question from the chat?
Sure. So how can we develop an actual economic vision for Davis rather than have the piecemeal proposal for the private sectors where it's not clear how they align with what direction the city citizens want to go?
Can I answer, take a swipe at that?
Yeah, go for it.
First off, all of our work has been done with the mayor, the city council, the Davis Chamber, the community leaders, the UC Davis faculty, which is why we asked the developer for that 50,000 square foot lab. The developer doesn't need a 50,000 square foot lab. The faculty need a 50,000 square foot lab. The students need a 50,000 square foot lab. And the community needs the 50,000 square foot lab. So every single thing we do is in concert with the city manager, the economic development team, the chamber, Davis Roots, Davis citizens, just like 100% renewable energy. I would never recommend 100% renewable energy into a park. It doubles and triples the energy price, but I know that's important to Davis residents. So just so you know, this, at least our vision, is a shared vision with the university, and we're a nonprofit, and the mayor sits on our board, as does the chancellor.
Anyone else want to jump in?
I would just say that we have to be very careful that we don't bet on just winners and losers. We don't take the flavor of the day, the concern of the day, and put all of our economic development and future on one particular industry. Things evolve and change over time. Once upon a time, we were one of the best communities for the creation of galvanized steel pipe. It's no longer what makes Davis. Once upon a time, we had one of the best farm chemical facilities in the region. We don't want to just choose winners and losers. We want to create an atmosphere where companies can grow and evolve. We've got a strong intellectual community in campus, and we shouldn't be picking winners and losers. We should be guiding future successes.
And I just want to add one more thing, if I can, to this, David. The way some of our communities, not just Davis, but Sacramento, we want to do a plan and we bring all the community in there and get everybody's politics and agendas on the table. That's not an economic plan. An economic plan is data-centric. It's measured by facts and evidence. It's got real policy wrapped around it from a sustainability standpoint. It understands where its returns and competitive advantages is. So part of the challenge that we have throughout this region, being the state capital region, everything is a huge political conversation. Well, you can see what's going on in the country. We're divided by a political ideology, and it is very destructive to our country. And now that there aren't facts and evidence on the table, we're exchanging, dramatic, overblown statements by people. And now all of a sudden, an irrational statement by the President of the United States suddenly becomes believed by 50% of the Americans when every single thing about it isn't factual. That's what happens when you reduce the civic conversation to politics and agendas and I'm a progressive and you're a conservative and this is what I think, versus sitting down and looking at the evidence. That's what scares me about climate change. By the time this country realizes we got a climate change problem, it's going to be too late until we get that evidence out there and get action on it.
Thank you, Barry.
Thanks.
Yeah,
All right.
Barry, I second your focus on data and metrics, and I think from a planning perspective, particularly the geoanalytical analysis that we're able to do now, and it's just unforeseeable the power of that capability in the coming years. We should be able to make very informed decisions about where we put things, when and how, and be able to plan for them and incentivize them. And then also make sure that they're performing the way they're supposed to in a soft way, and then also from a very data-centric standpoint too. So there is this point where in the land use planning space we're seeing kind of a transformation in how we're looking at our communities, how we understand them, and how we apply resources to make sure that we're going to be succeeding as well as we can. And I would love to have this region be the leader in the country on using data-informed decision-making around land use and development and financial analysis and the growth that we're going to see across the region.
Thank you. All right, Michelle, another question, please.
Since each phase of DIS must be carbon neutral, specifically how will DIS be carbon neutral in phase 1 other than purchasing offset carbon credits or just paying to reduce carbon emissions elsewhere in the city? Offsetting carbon emissions elsewhere in the city to allow more new DIS emissions does not reduce Davis' total carbon footprint.
I don't have any knowledge about DISC and their I know their EIR has been certified, and I know we as voters are being given the opportunity to vote in favor or opposed. I think it's a little late to be arguing about the EIR metrics, and it's now is it in the best interest of the community? And as you look at it in balance, is it going to serve today and future generations of the region and Davis's residents?
All right, Michelle.
Yep. Is our draft downtown plan adequately flexible to accommodate a post-COVID world?
That's a great question. You know, I went to one of the, I wasn't on the committee, but I did come to share some comments about the electrified personal transportation movement and, you know, scooters, bikes, electrified bikes, that type of thing, and the need to accommodate them on sidewalks so that pedestrians can still have access, and then reconsider the roadway dynamic because it is primarily single occupant vehicle driven. And that was an issue 6 months ago, but we see those personal transportation companies now have pulled the bulk of their stock off the streets. You know, we don't see nearly the number of personal transportation options out there. And that was the tsunami that we envisioned 6 months ago or a year ago. And now, it's a whole new issue that land use planners had never envisioned this as an issue. So I think it's worth a look at the downtown plan to see if it actually is flexible enough to support a post-COVID world. I mean, the reality is
Michael, could I add one piece to that? It didn't contemplate all the outside dining and all the outside carve out little eating parks, and the plan doesn't reflect the COVID pandemic. And we used to have 23,000 people a day going through the Amtrak depot pre-COVID, and we don't have a handful going through today, right? So, but we need to plan post-COVID. We
Right.
need to be thinking about the future, not just how do we get through the challenging times in the next 12 or 18 months.
And that's a really good point, Jim. The post-COVID dynamic is that, yeah, maybe there's some changes, but maybe some of what we've had in the past comes back as well. So the question is, at what scale, and what reemerges and what continues as it has developed?
David, it's Jim Gray, and I'm sorry, as you know, I'm doing double duty today, and I have to be somewhere else in 1 minute. So
Well, we appreciate you coming, and thank you for taking your lunch hour during jury duty to join us.
Thank you, David.
Joe, I wanted to ask you kind of a follow-up question on something that Jim had said.
Yeah, before you do that, David, can I respond to that question?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Just for a moment, because I think, and not surprisingly, both Michael and Jim were thoughtful in that. It's so a couple things. I was trained earlier in my life as a psychologist, and so I know enough to be dangerous that the way we're looking at the world right now is so deeply colored by what we're living in. I don't know what a post-COVID world looks like. Right now, the idea of getting on a plane for me personally is like, are you kidding? Like maybe never, right? But, we're going to evolve. So adaptability is going to be incredibly important. And when do we know when we've hit post-COVID? I don't know. But I want to echo, the plan wasn't developed with this in mind. I don't think anybody's plan was developed with this in mind. So the question is, at the core, as you think about everything, I agree with, Barry's comments about, we have to use data and analytics to make informed decisions. But remember, we're dealing with human beings, right? And, and human behavior. Sometimes my students are shocked with my comment about, economics is a social science, right? It's about human behavior at its core. And so we're going to have to learn how human behavior is going to change and how we as a society and we as a business community are going to adapt to that. So it's inevitable we're going to have to make changes, because we started with a plan that was focused on density, right? Because that's efficient and all the reasons. And, right now the idea of density for most of us is like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me. So adaptability, but it's going to take some time for us to figure this out.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the difficulty, because we're being asked to make decisions now in this kind of weird world that none of us anticipated, and none of us really know what it's going to look like in a few months. I mean, I was just thinking back yesterday, wow, it's been 6 months of this. Where are the 6 months gone? And then the next thing I'm kind of wondering is, like Jim was mentioning, all the outdoor dining and everything, which is really cool, but the weather's about to change. And so, although I am surprised by how many people are sitting out in the smoke eating, and maybe that's just how desperate they are to get out of the house. But what, and we're lucky in California, where you come from, sitting out on a December day is not going to be very pleasant. What are we going to do, when it's raining and cold, as opposed to 100 degrees?
Yeah, I know. And, look, I wish I had an answer to you for that, but I'll give you a couple of thoughts. First off, I think it's incredible how well our businesses have adapted, the restaurants, to make the change. I think the city deserves a lot of credit for quickly modifying rules and supporting the ability for restaurants to make that change. I think we're going to have to adapt again. But you're right. I mean, being a New Englander, there's no weather in California outside of the smoke that would prevent me from being outside, because it doesn't actually get cold here, people. But I think people, in general, do like to get out, and if it can be done safely, they're going to continue to do it. So I think the businesses are going to adapt again. The open air, that'll probably have a tent, right, to deal with the rain. And I think we're all accommodating too. Think about the behaviors that you never would have done 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months ago, and the kinds of things you're willing to do now. Will evolve. So we may, tolerate being a little chilly and putting an extra sweater on when we're eating outside. But I think we will adapt. I really do.
All right, Michelle, you got another one?
Yeah, two more. The key issue in planning for future, given that we may be facing substantial slack capacity in commercial real estate, is it better to pursue a greenfield development today, or should we be looking at how to use the infrastructure which may suddenly become stranded, especially if that threatened infrastructure is better for the environment?
Well, I think I understood the first part of the question. I'm not sure I did the second part. Michael, you want to take a crack at that, or you want?
Yeah, it's a several part question. And I think I'll lean on my prior comments about the downtown core being a priority, but that in some cases, certainly we should look at it as a community at whether expansion of our urban growth boundary is necessary. And it's up to the community to decide whether a certain development meets the needs of the community in that case. I think the challenges on the infrastructure side, we do have a very real issue with antiquated infrastructure, infrastructure that doesn't meet current standards. You can go down the list of it, but at the same time, new development, revitalizing development in older parts of town are a wonderful way to get that infrastructure back up to par. And I think what we found by a number of infill developments in other parts of the state is that the new developments are so much more efficient than the old developments, is that even if there's limited capacity, at least in most cases, water, wastewater, for example, and energy, that you can build a more intensive development without necessarily having to upgrade the capacity of the infrastructure. I think broadband is certainly an exception to that rule, but it is, I think that per use, there's a lot of different ways to look at how we want our community to grow. And this is why we have long-range planning documents. And it's part of why I referenced back to the Climate Action Adaptation Plan being such an important part of the next steps for the city of Davis and economic development. People don't normally look at CAPs as economic development tools, but it really should help to drive development and not just drive greenhouse gas emission reductions and resilience, because those are interlinked at their core.
Great. So that was a much better answer than I could have given. So I'll just add a couple things. I'll go back to, I don't believe this is an either or, and I don't have a crystal ball what the world's going to look like post COVID-19. I'm pretty confident that we're going to continue to work cooperatively. We're going to need spaces to do that. I do not believe we're all going to be sitting from home, for the rest of our careers. And certainly a lot of the companies that we work with and startups, they require lab space. They require cooperative working, merging hardware and software together. And again, I'll go back to $941 million in research money. That is research money that ultimately we want to apply and create social change and economic benefits. And those companies are going to start somewhere. There's no doubt in my mind. And I think it's to our benefit as a community and, and as from a global standpoint, to have that development happen here. I think it's a long conversation we want to get into around, how the downtown plan is going to evolve. I think it will. But let's take one small issue with downtown that we've been grappling with. David, you've been documenting this for as long as you've had the Vanguard. Parking, right? And how do we deal with, trying to move to a place where we drive less, and we have actual parking for the people that are coming down and all the challenges associated with that. We haven't even talked about that in the conversation today, but we haven't solved the downtown parking problem as it exists today, much less what it's likely to look like, when we densify.
So I just wanted to say that Barry unfortunately had to leave, but he wanted to thank everybody for being here. We have time for one more question. Michelle?
Yep. What positive impact will this have on our schools?
So by this, I'm assuming she means economic development and possibly DISC.
Okay, well, I can
Nope.
start with economic development, and then we can go from there. I mean, and I'll go back for a moment to, to my comments about housing and jobs and just growth in our community. We haven't had really much of either in quite some time. And so if you look at our economic base, it has, against inflation, maybe, depending on how you look at it, barely been keeping up, but probably not. And so, ultimately it reduces, our ability to, fund our schools. We've made up for that as a community by approving partial taxes and by taxing ourselves. And that has had been a huge stopgap for many, many years here in Davis. Ultimately, strong economic development will increase our tax base and will provide more funding for our schools. And David won't let me get started on a whole how we as a country, state, and region underfund K-12 education and higher ed, and we are underinvesting in the next generation. And it is our sacred duty to give to the next generation, the opportunities that we had. And so I think responsible, thoughtful economic development will raise our economic base and provide more funding for our schools. But it's a national and certainly state issue that can't be solved entirely locally. So I don't want to pretend that, more economic development magically means that we've got dramatically better funded schools and everything's fine. This is an issue we have to work at the federal and state level.
Yeah, that'll be
You're here,
a
Joe.
different panel. Michael, did you want to get the last word on this, or?
No, I just wanted to echo Joe's comments. I think they were very well put, Joe. Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out here on a Tuesday afternoon. It's an interesting world where we can host these events in the middle of the day and people will come out. So I want to thank Michael and Joe for sticking around and all of you guys for coming out. Thanks.
Thanks, David.